Chapter 3. On Hope in God Alone and on Confidence in Him. Although, as we have said, it is very important not to rely on your own efforts in this unseen warfare, at the same time, if we merely give up all hope of ourselves and despair of ourselves without having found another support, we are certain to flee immediately from the battlefield, or to be overcome and taken prisoner by our enemies. Therefore, together with the complete renunciation of ourselves, we should plant in our heart a perfect trust in God and a complete confidence in Him. In other words, we should feel with our whole heart that we have no one else to rely on except God, and that from Him and Him alone we can expect every kind of good, every manner of help, and victory. Since we are nothing, we can expect nothing from ourselves except stumblings and falls, which make us relinquish all hope of ourselves. On the other hand, we are certain always to be granted victory by God, if we arm our heart with a living trust in Him and an unshakable certainty that we will receive His help according to the psalm, "My heart trusted in Him, and I am helped." The following thoughts will help you to be grounded in this hope and thereby to receive help. First, that we seek help from God, who is omnipotent and can do all that He chooses, and therefore can also help us. Second, that we seek it from God, who, being omniscient and wise, knows all in the most perfect manner, and therefore knows fully what is best for the salvation of each one of us. Lastly, that we seek help from God, who is infinitely good, and who comes to us with ineffable love, always desirous and ready from hour to hour and from moment to moment, to give us all the help we need for complete victory in the spiritual warfare which takes place in us, as soon as we run with firm trust to the protection of His arms. And how is it possible that our good shepherd, who for 3 years went in search of the sheep that had gone astray, calling so loudly that his throat became parched, and following ways so hard and thorny that he shed all his blood and gave up his life? How is it possible, I repeat, that now, if his sheep follow him, turn to him with love, and call for his help with hope, he should fail to turn his eyes to the lost sheep, take it into his divine arms, and, placing it among the heavenly angels, make a welcoming feast for its sake? If our God never ceases to search diligently and lovingly for the blind and deaf sinner, like the woman for the piece of silver in the Gospels, how is it possible to suppose that He would abandon him now when, like a lost sheep, he cries out calling for his shepherd? And who will ever believe that God, who, according to the Revelation, constantly stands at the door of a man's heart and knocks, wishing to come in and sup with him, and bestow His gifts upon him, who will believe that this same God should remain deaf and refuse to enter if a man opens to him the door of his heart and invites him in? Another method of bringing life to a firm trust in God and of attracting His speedy help is to review in our memory all the instances of speedy divine help described in the Scriptures. These instances, which are so numerous, show us clearly that no one who put his trust in God was ever left confounded and without help. Look at the generations of old, says the wise Sirach, and see, did ever any trust in the Lord and was confounded? Armed with these 4 weapons, enter the battle with courage, my brother, and wage war watchfully with the full conviction that victory will be granted to you. For with their help, you will most certainly acquire perfect trust in God, and this trust will never fail to attract God's help and invest you with unconquerable power. These two together will, in the end, make complete distrust of yourself deeply rooted in you. I omit no occasion in this chapter of reminding you to distrust yourself, for I know no one who has no need to be reminded of it. Self-esteem is so deeply rooted in us and so firmly enmeshed in us, making us think that we are something, and something not unimportant, that it always hides in our heart as a subtle and imperceptible movement, even when we are sure that we do not trust ourselves and are on the contrary filled with complete trust in God alone. In order to avoid this conceit of heart and act without any self-reliance, led only by your trust in God, take care always to preserve an attitude in which the consciousness and feeling of your weakness always precede you in the contemplation of God's omnipotence, and let both alike precede your every action. Chapter 4. How to recognize whether a man acts without self-reliance and with perfect trust in God. It often happens that self-reliant men think that they have no self-reliance whatsoever, but put all their trust in God and rest confidently in Him alone. But in practice it is not so. They can ascertain it for themselves if they judge by what is in them and what happens to them if they fall down. If, when they grieve at their downfall, reproaching and abusing themselves for it, they think, "I shall do this and that, the consequences of my downfall will be effaced and all will be well once more," this is a sure sign that before the downfall they trusted themselves instead of trusting God. And the more gloomy and disconsolate their grief, the more it shows that they relied too much on themselves and too little on God, and therefore the grief caused by their downfall is not tempered by any comfort. If a man does not rely on himself but puts his trust in God, when he falls he is not greatly surprised, and is not overcome with excessive grief, for he knows that it is the result of his own impotence, and above all, the weakness of his trust in God. So his downfall increases his distrust of himself, and makes him try all the harder to increase and deepen his humble trust in God. And further, hating the vile passions which caused his downfall, he thereupon endures peacefully and calmly the labors of penitence for having offended God, and armed with still more trust in God, he thereupon pursues his enemies with the greatest courage and resoluteness, even unto death. I should like some people to reflect on what I have said above, for although they think of themselves virtuous and spiritual, when they fall into some transgression they are overcome with anguish and torment, and find no peace anywhere. Exhausted by this grief and anguish, which they suffer for no other reason but self-esteem, they run, again urged by self-esteem, to their spiritual father to be freed of this burden. They should have done this immediately after the downfall, and for no other reason but a desire to wash away as quickly as possible the filth of sin which has offended God, and acquire new strength to fight against themselves through the most holy sacrament of repentance and confession. Chapter 5. On the wrong opinion of those who deem excessive grief a virtue. It is wrong to regard as a virtue the excessive grief which men feel after committing a sin, not realizing that it is caused by pride and a high opinion of themselves, based on the fact that they rely too much on themselves and their own powers. For by thinking that they are something important, they undertake too much, hoping to deal with it by themselves. When the experience of their downfall shows them how weak they are astounded, like people who meet with something unexpected, and they are cast into turmoil and grow faint-hearted. For they see, fallen and prone on the ground, that graven image which is themselves, upon which they put all their hopes and expectations. This does not happen to the humble man who trusts in God alone, expecting nothing good from himself. Therefore when he falls into some transgression, he also feels the weight of it and grieves, but is not cast into turmoil and is not perplexed, for he knows that it happened through his own impotence, to experience which in downfalls is nothing unexpected or new to him.